Good morning, everyone. Welcome to your Celtic therapy session on Thursday, where we're here to discuss last night's 0-0 result against FC Kairat of Kazakhstan at Celtic Park in the UEFA Champions League playoff round. Celtic's Champions League future this season is in the balance. Celtic now have to go to Kazakhstan and win, either across 90 minutes, extra time, or penalties. It's going to be a tense one. It's going to be an exciting match, Ryan. Listen, we've all had a sleep. There was a lot of raw emotions flying about last night. We're here to discuss some of the big issues at Celtic. We're here to discuss the match itself. We're here to discuss your comments. We're here to discuss the way we cover Celtic sometimes. There was some criticism of us last night, which we will address in a fair way. And we've got lots to get into here, Ryan. How are you feeling, first of all, the morning after the night before, as it were?
Yeah, this is the really difficult part of probably this job in general, because you've got to stay professional, but at the same time you actively care, and I know that you care as well with what's going on the pitch. So it's all about that 50-50 split, staying professional but also caring about what's happening and what's occurring in front of you. That disappointment is still pretty much there from last night. I got home quite late last night and read some of the comments that are going about on social media. Social media at the moment regarding Celtic is not a happy place, and it probably shouldn't be after last night's performance. And I would echo quite a lot of the sentiments that people are saying online. Just a very disappointing evening last night. Yes, Celtic didn't lose. Yes, they're still in the tie, but a real opportunity missed, especially at home, to put an advantage in the game ahead of the second leg. They've got it all to do in Kazakhstan. I still think they can go through, but it's going to be a difficult task going to Kazakhstan and really getting through in that capacity, especially
and
when you're away from
overcoming
home.
the difficulties, Ryan, because there is difficulties with going to Kazakhstan. I do think there are issues for the team, and you're talking about Celtic's chances next week. It's hard to put a number on it. For me, it feels 50-50. It feels like everything is very much in the balance. And, if I'm looking at a set of scales, everything's just set. It could go one way or the other. That's how I feel about it. I don't think Celtic are favourites next week. I don't necessarily think Kairat either. Perhaps slight favourites. I don't know. That's the difficulty of judging this two-legged tie. It's the difficulty of judging unknown circumstances, unknown conditions, unknown travel logistics, unknown recovery time, etc., etc. There's a lot that goes into it. We're going to be talking about a lot today, as I said at the top of the show. We're going to be getting into all sorts of comments. I can't promise that we're going to solve anything, and I can't promise that you're going to feel better by the end of it. But what I can promise is that we're going to talk about it all, and we're going to talk about it in a real way, in a way that feels genuine to us, and hopefully to yourselves as well. We're going to provide a wide range of opinion, because the thing about Celtic is, the Celtic sport is not a hive mind. There's a lot of varying opinion. We're going to try and give a platform to all of it. I said on last night's video that I would promise to bring in viewer comments from below the line, because sometimes bringing in comments from the live chat while we're speaking and while we're trying to formulate our own thoughts on everything can be difficult to do. So I gave the opportunity for people to leave comments below. A lot of you did, and I'm very grateful for that. I was up this morning getting them all clipped, getting them all sorted so they can go in the stream. That doesn't happen by magic either. I've got what I think is a wide range of comments regarding last night, the big picture, everything. It's not all the comments that were left below the line, but it's as many as that I could do this morning. First of all, before we start, Ryan, before we get into all that, I'm going to clear up a question from the live chat, because that I saw this morning just quickly, and because I don't want this becoming an issue throughout as it comes. Brown Warrior was asking, can someone clear up the fielding of Valery Gromyko last night, because on the website last week it stated he was suspended for the game. Yeah, I think that notification on the UEFA website, and even from some of the chat from the Kairat camp, was that he was suspended, but that wasn't actually the case. So the rules and regulations, if you look at them on UEFA's website, states that yellow cards are in the qualifying stages are wiped out after 2 qualifying rounds. So the yellow card that he received in the first qualifying round no longer counted with regard to the playoff round. And so that is why he was not suspended last night. It's not a Legia Warsaw situation. It's nothing like that. He was able to play last night. So just going to clear that up. Secondly, I'm going to bring in Brendan Rodgers, a clip of Brendan Rodgers and what he had to say after the game last night. He was asked about the sack the board chants, which were audible, and he gave his response to that, and then he talked a little bit about transfers. So I'm just going to play that clip now for you and set the scene for everything that follows in our discussion today.
The fans were pretty vocal at the end in their displeasure, the disappointment. Is that a justifiable reaction in your view?
Well, listen, what I do know is over many years, sack the board normally means sack the manager. It's normally the manager that goes when that starts to be sung. But no, listen, I think I can only really look at the players that we have here and the performance. We've known for a long time what we've needed as a squad, so I don't want to go into that. I can only concentrate on what we have here. Of course, at the end of the game, we're having to shuffle things about to try and make it work and play players out of position. But the players' endeavour in the second half was really good. But at this level, it's more than that. So hopefully we can show that. The boys are a great bunch of lads. They're really honest. They've started the season well. Defensively, have been strong. But tonight, offensively, we just couldn't show those moments of quality to break through. Well, I think that we need to improve the squad. There's clarity around that for a long time, and so we see that, and I think supporters see that. We certainly do in football. We need to improve. So, and then from that, this is a performance club. This is a club that's to perform. And that starts on the field. And you do that with getting the very best players you possibly can to allow you to perform.
Telling comments from Brendan Rodgers. And listen, I think some supporters want Brendan Rodgers to go further and start actively haranguing the board for what's going on this summer. He's very much taken the position of, I can't answer the questions that you're asking me sometimes. I've said consistently that I need Celtic to strengthen this team. The comments about Celtic being a performance club, I think, are pretty pointed, and I think, Celtic aren't they shouldn't be a risk-averse club, I don't think. I think they've got the stature, they've got the resources, they've got the clout, frankly, to have a bigger ambition than that for me, Ryan. And we've talked about this a lot on the channel over the last few weeks and months. I did a big kind of deep dive on Dermot Desmond with Hamish a couple of weeks ago on the channel, and we talked about why recruitment is the way it is at Celtic, and it all comes round to this risk-averse business strategy, and it comes from the top, it comes from the very, very top, it comes from Dermot Desmond, and it feeds its way down the club, and ultimately that clashes with this ambition to be a performance club that comes from the football department, because Brendan Rodgers and his players, these guys are sports personalities. Sport is all about achievement and pushing yourself and progressing and getting better all the time. The people in the boardroom are financially minded. It's all about making sure that you are taking care of money and you're saving for a rainy day and all this thing, which frankly at times I find pretty galling. That's my personal opinion, but that's what the clash is. And so just what's your reaction to what Brendan Rodgers had to say last night?
Yeah, just first of all, on the sack the board comment, I think that was just a bad joke that didn't land at all, and you could see it in his face after he said it. He was like, oh, maybe that one didn't work, it didn't go down well with the people that were in attendance of that press conference. I could see it. I know when he's trying to tell a joke and when he gets the laughter of the reporters after the game, he didn't seem to get that, and he moved on pretty quickly from that. I agree with everything that he's saying. Defensively, they were strong because they kept a clean sheet, but attacking, they just didn't have anything. They hardly had any chances apart from that one that was pushed onto the post in the second half. Just on the risk stuff and risk aversion, it feels as if though that Celtic take risks when it comes to these Champions League qualifiers. It just doesn't. If they're so against taking risks, then surely they would apply that to their football strategy and bring in the players that will get you into that promised land of the Champions League phase. That would be not taking risks. That would be speculating to accumulate. unfortunately, they do take risks in that regard, despite them saying that they don't, because look at the team that ended that game last night. Look at the amount of changes. Even when Brendan Rodgers was mentioning the shuffling of players, how many different positions did Benjamin Negron have on the pitch before he came off? You know, and players were getting shifted everywhere. Liam Scales back to left back. It was just a cluttered mess last night towards the end of the game. Players in different positions. It was just a very, very, I'm taking my own personal opinion, a very strange game to attend as well, because there was that buzz going into the game, and then the game started, and because nothing happened straight away, that, I'm not going to say toxicity, because I don't think it was that far, but there was the moaning and groaning from pretty early on from those in the stands, and the noise, the decibels in that regard continued to rise as the game went on, and people just weren't happy with what they were seeing on the pitch, and then that amounted to discontent off the pitch, which then brought that sort of atmosphere. I agree with what Brendan Rodgers is saying. Brendan Rodgers is an ambitious manager. He wants the best for the team, and he's clearly not got the tools to do that job, to match that ambition at this moment in time. And that's down to the board, unfortunately. They've not equipped him with the right tools to compete of that level in Europe yet. The problem is, though, that Brendan Rodgers, as we spoke about yesterday, he said that he had the players to get past Kairat, and that will be held against them, unfortunately, if they don't get through, because this is the squad, as we said last night, this is the squad that's going to be there for the two legs. This is what he's got to work with. He said that in his pre-match press conference, and unfortunately it will be held against him if he can't get the team through the second leg.
Yeah, and listen, I think you can't totally ignore the fact that Kairat, a team who have spent 200,000 on players over the last 2 years, are coming to Celtic Park and doing such a job against Celtic, who have the resources and who have spent a fair amount of money over the last 2 years on players. I know players have left, I know all of that, but you can't completely say it was all about transfers last night. I don't think that's accurate to say, first of all, okay? And I don't think that's a deflection, because I think when you consider the match, that's one thing. When you consider the big picture, I think it's a general malaise or inaction of the Celtic board to fully equip Brendan Rodgers' side to be the best it can be. I think both things can be true at the same time. Some people would disagree with that, and certainly plenty have, but that's just how I see things. I don't think you can't completely put everything last night on the fact that Celtic haven't signed players, because it goes deeper than that. And actually, I think there was warning signs, last season, in the second half of last season, that Celtic's football wasn't getting better, or it was regressing to an extent. It was becoming a little bit more predictable, and there was a explosiveness started to, dissipate from the team. You only need to look at the Aberdeen game, the cup final, as the perfect warning shot that Celtic could have got in of why they needed to strengthen and push on and raise standards again. Brendan Rodgers made that point, very quickly after that final, and he made the point that Celtic needed to push themselves to get to another level, and they just haven't. And it's so disappointing, and it is upsetting, and it feels, as someone said in the chat, that it feels like regression. When Celtic aren't even standing still, it feels like Celtic are going a little bit backwards at the moment, and that's what the most concerning thing is, considering the position of strength that Celtic should be in. So what we're going to do now is we're going to bring in some comments from last night. As I said, I asked for comments, and there's plenty of measured and reasonable points being made here. What I will make clear is that we don't agree with every comment that's going to come up on the screen. So if we're putting up a comment, don't take it as, the fact that we're approving like that from what their opinion is. We just want to share a wide range of views. The first one I'm going to put up here is from Tam PTV, who, like yourself, Ryan, was at the game last night. He said the board deserved criticism, and I joined in with the chance. To leave us in that position going into the most important tie of our season is a dereliction of duty. For example, we knew Kyogo wanted away last summer, still not replaced, and no real strong striker rumours either 1 year later. However, the players we do have should be better than that. If we do go out next week, we'll be shark in the car park territory. I have no faith at this point we'll get the signings in, and no doubt if we do go out, the board will happily say the squad we've got should be good enough to compete in the Europa League. We are in trouble. Rodgers will be away next summer, and another rebuild will be required. Someone fly to Greece and find Ange, please. I miss that big guy and the way his team made me feel. like, and listen, the Ange stuff aside, because Ange, I don't think Ange takes backward steps in his career, first of all, right? So like that's a bit of a dream, but I think the overall point here is like that there is, you can't totally discount the performance last night, and I think everything going on around the club has influenced the performance of Celtic last night. If you're not pushing as a club, if you're not seeing people coming in and competing for your position, for example, then it can lead to this kind of difficulty in raising the standards that are required at a higher level to get into this Champions League. I'm convinced that all of this comes from the top down, but equally the performance last night wasn't good enough. The passing was not good enough at times. I made the point last night that it wasn't even the final pass that was missing last night. It was the pass or two or three before the final pass that was missing. Celtic just couldn't get at Kairat at all. Kairat defended very well, putting Celtic into wide areas, and Celtic just didn't have an answer for it, Ryan.
They didn't. It was just a poor game for almost everybody involved. I can't really think of any player that got pass marks last night. For me, I think the blame is like a 33.3% in 3 different categories, 3 different departments. The board, yes, for not backing the manager sufficiently enough. The players, for the performance that they put in last night, because they've still got to take the blame. Once they pass that, once they get onto the pitch, it's up to them to do the job, and they didn't do it last night. But I've also I think Brendan Rodgers has got to take some of the blame last night as well. I didn't understand what Celtic were doing. I didn't see their tactics, I didn't see their style. I thought it was quite turgid, and the manager will take the blame for that. So I think those 3 categories are where my sort of blame would go. But it's just, I think we've seen this iceberg coming, unfortunately, in the Champions League or in a game of this magnitude. But we've been talking about it for months. We've been talking about the lack of quality signings coming in the door, and the style of play that Brendan Rodgers' side have been playing. Yes, there have been some good performances in pre-season, good start to the season, not anything to really write home about, but they've got 3 wins out of 3. But we have kind of seen this coming, unfortunately. We've been speaking about it. We said if they don't get the proper recruitment through the door, then a result like this could happen. Despite it not being a defeat, still, as much as it isn't a defeat, it still feels in some ways like a defeat, because Celtic didn't take advantage of their home advantage that we were speaking about prior to the game. So I think the blame goes in different places. I agree with a lot of the points that the commenter made. The only thing that I would say, and I'm not going to speak for any supporters because it's not my job to do so, I just thought those chants during the game were not going to help the players that were on the park trying to make things happen. I thought that.
Yeah, but Ryan, those chants are going to happen because this has been building. It's not. I don't think we can say supporters shouldn't be doing that in that moment, because they don't have another outlet to express their frustration at the board. Completely. Because the board are not accountable to anyone. And so when the members of the board are sitting there in the main stand, that is going to become the method that these fans communicate their disappointment with the strategy of the club. And that's just a natural reaction to what has happened this summer. And I get it. And there's, in the intensity of a tense match that is on a knife edge, you're looking for unity. But that lack of unity has been sowed by the board. And I think that's really, really important. I agree with you. I understand the point you're trying to make, but supporters have to make themselves heard. It can't all just be on social media and under tweets. Do you think Michael Nicholson's sitting on Twitter? No, he's not. Do you think Michael Nicholson's watching YouTube? He isn't. And so how do you get the message that this isn't good enough? You have to confront them with your voice and make yourself heard. And I think that's what fans were doing last night. I think also just on the point of Rodgers and stuff, he has to take the blame for last night, etc. I get it, all that. What I would argue though is that Rodgers is having to shift things about because he's got a lack of options. He signed Benjamin Nygren principally as a creative central midfielder, so the fact that he has to move him out of position is not ideal, in that second half. There's no backup to Kieran Tierney, so again, he's having to move players about. It's naturally going to become a bit ragged and a bit dysfunctional, and I think that's, again, a natural consequence of the lack of options and the lack of strength of depth that Brendan Rodgers has available in his squad, and that's what the most disappointing is. We're going to bring more comments in here. In an ideal world, we should have had 6 good options competing for the 3 forward positions, writes Mantis Toboggan MD. Just now we only have 1, in my view, Diaz Maeda. Some folk might count James Forrest, so let's be charitable and say we have 2. Some folk might point out that Jota is injured. Okay, let's be super charitable and say we have 3. Even painting the best picture possible, we are 3 quality front players short, and this is despite the fact that we've signed 2 centre forwards already this summer, Yamada and Osmond, and extended the contract of Johnny Kenny, but not one of those strikers is currently deemed good enough to start by the manager. The guy currently starting most games looks like he's never played football before. Again, that's the view of Mantis Toboggan MD. We're getting away with it so far domestically, and we might still get away with it versus Kairat, but we really are being terribly mismanaged on and off the pitch just now. It's just that none of our domestic competition are really in any sort of position to properly punish us. I think there's, people will relate to a lot of that. Next comment is from Dovesfan, and this gets into a general point about everything going on at the club. I don't think it's just one department at Celtic at the moment. Dovesfan 1 writes, stadium maintenance has been poor recently, with storm damage in January not being repaired. Internal stadium security shambolic and dangerous by blocking off areas and not training staff in it. Celtic TV has almost muted fan noise, drab commentary, unreliable with common technical issues. Last night's game isn't even uploaded yet for overseas viewers 6 hours after the game finished. I don't know if that's the case at the time that we're talking, by the way. He did write this comment a few hours ago. Transfer strategy has been appalling, leaving the manager and squad woefully unprepared for the European and domestic campaign. I'm not reactionary, and rarely do I have a go at the board, but this accumulation of issues is unacceptable. Ryan, this feeds into an overall feeling that it doesn't feel like Celtic are doing anything right at the moment. Yes, there's this domestic dominance and continued domestic success, but it feels like multiple departments across the club aren't really, it doesn't feel like, and again, they might have a counter to the points that are being made here, but it doesn't feel like any of it is really in service of supporters and fans at the moment.
No, it's not the greatest place for the club to be in, and it's not just on the park; it's off the park with all of the issues that were brought up by the commenter there. Going to Celtic Park as a spectator and watching the games, you're just going to the games, and that's it, really. There doesn't seem to be any fan service in and around the ground. You just take your seat, and that's it. And even those standards, as you look outside the ground and you see certain flags aren't put up in those areas. I know there was that one picture that was going about a couple of weeks ago where the spelling of a word was halfway because one of the flags wasn't even there, and it just looked really, really shoddy. So, yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. It does feel at the moment as if Celtic aren't doing anything right. I would totally echo those comments, and it doesn't help that there's uncertainty on the park as well, which then brings these off-field issues to light, because there just feels like a sense of negativity. And yeah, it's all the security. It's just not great. It's just it's very difficult to try and be. I'm trying to be as positive as I can.
Yeah, no, but I totally get it. And actually, some of these comments don't even need a massive response, because it's all laid out there, and that's what people are feeling, and it is not great. It's not great, folks.
If I could talk about the previous comment about the forward positions, that's mismanagement. That forward line's a mismanagement, and I know we didn't touch on certain players last night, but there needs to be wholesale changes. The striking position is just not good enough at the moment for Celtic for the Champions League. I would worry about Celtic in the Champions League if they've got that forward line going into things. I'm trying to be as fair as I can, but the optics just do not look good for that forward line at all. Nope. You're relying on James Forrest, who played against Shakhtar Karagandhi back in the days. You're now relying on him to be a first choice winger in 2025. You've got Yang, who was arguably Celtic's best attacker on the night, whose future's been up in the air for most of the summer. We don't know if he's staying or he's going. It's just a real concern. As much as I was talking about the midfield last night, the striking position just speaks for itself, unfortunately, in the forward areas.
And listen, there's actually no point in being nice about it. Like, Brendan Rodgers is one of the most successful Celtic managers in history, right? He has been saying for 8 months that this Celtic attack is not good enough. So it's totally fine for everyone else to say This attack is not fit for purpose. You know, Brendan Rodgers is saying it every week. The attack needs to be strengthened for 8 months now, Ryan. Like, and that's the situation we're in. So, yeah, you don't want to single players out. You don't want to scapegoat anyone. But I think it's almost a fact at this point. Celtic's attack is not good enough for the ambitions that we want Celtic to, or at the level we want Celtic to operate at. Next comment, Matthew Rossi saying, everyone involved needs to share a little bit of the blame for tonight. The manager for not preparing the players physically or tactically, the players for not working as hard or fighting as much as the opposition, and even the supporters who weren't as loud or supportive as usual on European nights. But the board are the ones who are the source of the problem and are letting everyone mentioned down. And again, it's this feeling that the Celtic board isn't serving the interests of the people who generate the income that sustains the club. And there is a disconnect there. And, the disconnect has been very visibly seen in recent years, most notably in the season we don't talk about, the failed 10-in-a-row season. That chasm was so visibly on display during that season. And it is growing again to those levels. Now, I'm not suggesting Celtic are going to have a disastrous season, and that's the weird thing. You know, Celtic can still have a successful season, and ultimately they can still make the Champions League. But the disconnect between the board and the values and the ambitions of the sport is just so great, and that's what we're seeing right now, unfortunately. I'm going to bring in another comment. Gboy67 saying, this channel is a bit of a happy clapper channel, and this comes from a guy who contributes financially to this site and has done for a long time. You have to speak now for the huge percentage of fans who are sick of this penny-pinching board and start agitating for change, because this isn't good enough. Apologists claim they have guided the club to unprecedented success. Against who? Were you watching 9 in a row? Line it up against our total capitulation in Europe and the board's outright refusal to properly invest in our club. Then tell me this board is somehow a success. We're going to lose Rodgers. That is a given. Vardy, do me a bloody favour. Yeah, look, listen, there's going to be another comment that I'm going to try and find here just regarding what we were saying last night. Absolutely reeks of a channel gagging to keep their press pass, deflecting blame onto the players on the park and the manager. Get a grip, everyone knows where the problems lie, and call it out. I'm going to say a few things. First of all, I want to say thank you to Gboy67 for being a continued supporter of the channel and the website and everything that we do. I really appreciate that. Chris, I kind of replied to Chris's comment in the reply last night. I said I would give him a fuller answer this morning. And listen, I don't want to come across too defensive here, because actually I don't care if someone disagrees with what I'm saying, you know, and kind of what we're putting across or the opinions that we hold. But what I do care about is that people recognise that we're coming from a good place. I would hate people to think that we're trying to massage opinion for any sort of reason other than we think, or we're trying to do things to kind of manipulate a point of view in Celtic favour or anyone else's favour. You know, I take that kind of thing seriously. The reality is, and I'm going to be real with you, we don't have a press pass at Celtic, and we never have. You know, the fact that we do the coverage we do without that, I think, and it comes across as if we do have press passes, I think is a testament to the work we do and the effort we put in to provide a wide range of coverage from all sorts of places. Now, we had a press conference clip earlier, but that came from the Press Association. We were not in the press room last night. We didn't have the opportunity to ask Brendan Rodgers questions. When we do have that opportunity to ask Brendan Rodgers questions as an outlet, we do it at away games, and all the away press access is handled by away clubs, opposition clubs, who do give us press access. Celtic do not give us press access. So I just want to clear that up. And just on, you went on to say in the comments that you took issue with some of the things you were saying, Ryan. And Ryan doesn't need me to defend him, everyone. But I'm going to anyway. So Ryan also is trying to do a job. And Ryan was at the game last night as a supporter. You know, he paid into that game last night. He wasn't in the press area. He wasn't doing favours for anyone. And sometimes we do like to compartmentalise these shows and this coverage. So when we do a live reaction to a match, we like to talk about the match and everything going on in the match. some of the big picture stuff does get discussed, but we like to focus on like what we saw in front of our eyes and what happened that night. And Ryan's just coming out of Celtic Park, talking about the game, talking about Rodgers' tactics, talking about what Rodgers is doing, etc. And so that's where that's coming from. So again, we're not perfect and we don't do everything perfectly at all. But I want everyone to have a trust in us that we're not doing anything to kind of cover for people who don't deserve covering for, frankly, and actually kind of goes against what we think anyway, because I really feel strongly that the Celtic board is not doing a good job in terms of the football department at the club at the moment. And actually last night on Twitter, I did say, this was during the game, I said the anti-board chants at Celtic Park have been brewing and can come as no surprise to senior figures who have failed to either display the semblance of a strategy to strengthen Celtic or communicate one to anyone, even through club channels. This is a PR disaster of their own making. I use the word PR disaster because it was the moment where they were kind of squirming in their seats, but it's just a disaster of their own making, not even a PR disaster. So I just want to make that clear. And look, I get that not everyone watches every video that we do. Not everyone is tracking my tweets to find out what we think about everything, and I understand that. And in isolation, you might look at last night's video and think, listen, they were a bit too critical of the team. They should be calling the board out more. But we do have lots on the channel talking about all of this big picture stuff. And hopefully that comes across over time. But yeah, listen, I appreciate the feedback. And as I say, if you've listened to everything I've just said over the last few minutes and you still disagree with me, that's totally fine. I just wanted to put some context out there.
Yeah, and the thing about my position is I only get to see everything once because I'm at the game. When I'm at the game, I'm on my phone doing my player ratings, which thankfully never seen the light of day last night, or whatever you want to call it, because there wasn't much to rate last night, unfortunately, in a positive sense. Yeah, when I'm at the game, I'm doing those ratings, and I only see what's going on once, unless there's a highlight of a goal that comes on later on, and I watch that at half time or full time. So when I'm there, I'm wanting to talk about what actually happened at the game, what I see, the opinion that I've got, and as much as I want to do the bigger picture stuff, I usually leave that for the day after, once I've had a time to think about everything, once I've taken in, not influenced by what people say online, because I like to form my own opinions, but I like to see what everybody else is saying as well, to sort of capture the mood music of what's going on in and around the club, both on the pitch and off of it. It's good to have a little bit of time to just check your phone and see what the big talking points are before coming onto a show like today, and then talking about the bigger picture. But last night I was completely focused on what happened on the park, because I just felt that was the most important thing to talk about, because that's what everybody else was talking about leading up to the game.
Yeah, and listen, I hope that didn't come across as too defensive of our stance, but I can't criticise Celtic for communication if we're also getting criticism and we don't communicate and provide context for everything. So listen, and I get it, emotions were running high last night, and I said I would bring in comments, and I don't want to hide away from the comments that are critical of us, because there's no point in doing that. And a fair amount of people were agreeing with Chris last night, and fair play to them for that. Next comment is Greig Ferguson, and again, this is the alternative viewpoint, isn't it? And this is, we try to give an alternative view and a wide range of opinions. Greig Ferguson saying the manager needs to take responsibility for that. I agree that the window has been awful, and I am a critic of the board, but with countless millions spent last year, 3 of them on the bench, 1 not performing, we should be winning that tie comfortably, or at least putting in a performance. The manager also needs scrutinised. The performance was awful, but we've seen these types of performances frequently under Rodgers. Looks to me like he's leaving next year, hence the board's understandable hesitancy to give him more money, given all his big signings are not getting in the team at the moment. People forget not just Engels and Trusty and Ida, but also Bernardo. Of course, the board will be scrutinising these signings. And this, the problem with Rodgers' future thing, I think it is impacting Celtic now, unfortunately. And I said earlier in the summer that we have to wait and see how things develop. I think there's enough evidence, enough out there that there is a disconnect between Brendan Rodgers and the Celtic board. I don't think you need to be a genius to work that out, even if Brendan Rodgers isn't filleting them publicly on occasion after occasion. He is making his view heard to an extent. My big concern is that there's stuff going on behind the scenes that we just don't know about. And that's my personal opinion. It's not based on any knowledge or rumours I'm hearing or etc. But it does feel like something is going on behind the scenes that we were not privy to about the direction of Celtic, about what's going on in terms of transfers between the board and Brendan Rodgers' future. And that's a really difficult place to be. And I think it underlines that Celtic need an overarching strategy here. They need this bridge between the football department and the board. They need a sporting director, is what I'm saying, right? And people will go, like, that's not the answer. You know, that's just going to add more problems. It's going to add more bureaucracy and all this, right? But if the Celtic board need to trust someone to have a financial brain and a footballing brain. Right now at the moment, Celtic is too fragmented. There's a footballing side of things and there's a financial side of things. Celtic need to give someone the authority and have the trust in someone to have both both things in their head at the same time. And right now, that's not what's happening. And I think that would help alleviate some concerns about the overall strategy and future of Celtic Ryan. And it would take away some of this talk that just because a manager's leaving next summer, you've got to stop all transfers. That's an absurd situation for a football club to be in, is it not?
In modern football, yes. And a lot of these teams do have sporting directors or directors of football. There's got to be somebody in between, as you said, the manager and the board. I think there's got to be a middle ground. There's got to be somebody there that's there whenever a manager does leave the club, just so that there's a strategy for somebody else coming in. The football club can't just completely implode because a manager leaves, because managers get too much power. I thought that was going to be Paul Tisdale. I thought he was going to be that guy that's in between the manager and the board and bringing in signings and working on some of the areas of the football club that maybe the manager doesn't work on in the modern game. But we don't know really. I mean, we've got a slight idea of what Paul Tisdale's remit is, but we've never heard from him. We've never had an interview from him, and that's part of the wider issue, the lack of communication. You know, a 10-15 minute interview in Celtic TV could have done so much for people to understand what Paul Tisdale is actually doing at the club at the moment. But instead, we got the one statement when he was appointed, and that's it. You know, so we've just got to take that at face value and take those words at face value, which is it's just another area of the club that's really quite frustrating. The communication is just non-existent at this moment in time. But it's never been really that great. Let's be perfectly honest. I just think that area needs sorted. If it's not going to be Paul Tisdale that's going to be that guy in between the board and the manager, then it's got to be somebody else. But we've been calling on this. I mean, I remember after that 2020-21 season, and there was links with, you know, some of the names that were linked. The Italian that was at Juventus. You had Fergal Harkin as well. You had the guy that was at Huddersfield previous to that. There was loads of links to the club for a potential director of football, sporting director. That never happened. It was a good idea, and then it never came to fruition. So I think in modern football you need somebody that's in between the manager and the board, because there's too many parts of a club now to run that the manager has to be. I mean, for different clubs they'll have different uses for the manager, but I think the manager should be focusing on the team, and then there should be another guy that does the other stuff, because there's so much to do in the running of a football club, and that can't all just go out the window once a manager leaves. And that's a big problem as well. I think there's a lot of uncertainty about Brendan Rodgers' position at the end of the season, and that's totally fair, because he said he's going to do the 3 years, but there's no update on whether he's staying, and while that continues to rumble on, there will be that discontent. So I would like that to be resolved one way or the other sooner rather than later as well.
Another comment here from Johnny Boy Soul saying, disappointment and frustration sums up my feelings. But what can we really expect at this level when an entire front line are sold for big money or are injured and are not replaced with similar or better quality? I can't fathom what the club are doing with the guts of £100 million in the bank. If they communicated with the fans and there was a reasonable explanation, we might actually understand. All we get is stoic silence. This could get messy. Listen, we don't need to really respond to that. It kind of frames everything we've been talking about over the last 40 minutes or so. And I feel like we've been on for 5 minutes, Ryan. I'm going to bring in some live comments, because we do enjoy our live viewers as well, and we thank them for joining us live. It helps us, helps the videos, it helps us, it helps the conversation flow forward, bring up talking points. Stephen Ray making the point, this is almost identical to the summer of 2018, to the point our playoff opponents play in the same colours. The manager is at odds with the board unable to get players the manager needs. I think that's very fair. Craig Rankin is upset at Brendan Rodgers. Craig Rankin saying another shocking European result for Celtic. Rodgers is not an elite coach and Celtic are not a Champions League club. Who really fancies Ibrox in 2 weeks? Not me. Celtic have been rotten for ages. Listen, I take your point, Craig, but like objectively, Celtic were a Champions League club last year. They made it through the league phase. A lot of clubs didn't. Celtic competed well against Bayern Munich. So that's not a reason to not pitch yourselves at a standard of excellence, and that's, I feel like, what Rodgers is trying to do. So I take your point. I do kind of disagree with that one, to be honest with you. Raymond Haddon saying, element of hope here. Raymond Haddon saying, good morning all. It may be easier to play them away from home. They did their homework in nailing the wingers who did not get a chance to create many chances. Look, and again, I don't want to focus too much on Kairat because we're not a Kairat channel, but I thought they did a good job last night, and I thought they did the job that they set out to do very, very well. I think they did have an element of threat in an attacking sense, but what they really did well was forcing Celtic into these wide areas and not giving Celtic a route into their penalty box. And they did a job on Celtic effectively, I feel like. Yes, there was problems with the performance of Celtic, problems with the intensity of Celtic, but Kairat also frustrated Celtic and had a part to play in all of that. So they did do well last night. Will they be a bit more open at home in front of their own supporters and their environment? There's a possibility of that, and Celtic need to be there to match that, you know. And Cal McGregor making a point last night, there's obviously still belief within the Celtic camp they can go over there and secure the result they need. Whether it's going to be easier to play them away from home or just different, I'm not sure where that lies, but it's really important to underline. We've been speaking for 40 minutes and it feels like a funeral, Ryan, but Celtic are not out of the Champions League yet. Yeah, and that's also a fact that can't be denied.
Yeah, and Brendan Rodgers was speaking about it last night, that there's a sort of joy and a beauty or an excitement that there's one game to decide this tie. It's a bit of a one-game shootout between the two sides, and that's what it's going to have to be, unfortunately. Whoever's the better team on the night will get through to the Champions League, and you're just hoping that can be Celtic, despite us being, negative. And I think the negativity has been absolutely warranted after last night's game, and it's still prevalent, as you can see in the comments that are coming in, even through the live. There's not a lot of happy people in the comments, and that's understandable. And I've got to be honest, I agree with the majority of them in that unhappiness at last night, because it wasn't a good enough performance. But they're not out of the Champions League. It's still level. It's still a stalemate, and they've got the players, despite our grumblings about the squad. They've still got players that can hurt Kairat. They didn't do it last night, but I've got no doubt that there's players that can win that game for Celtic next week, and that's got to be the aim and objective, as much as there's grumblings just now. Once it's kick-off at 5:45 on Tuesday, then all focus will be on trying to get through to the Champions League, because that's where Celtic want to be at the end of the day. They want to be in the Champions League.
Hazel Finn asking, and again, we're bringing in regulars. Hazel's on the show. I know there's a lot of new people on the stream today and a lot of different people watching this. Hazel's one of our very regular viewers and always comments, so I want to highlight those people too. Hazel's saying, my question is, and I know you won't know the answer, why is Brendan Rodgers not more involved with the transfers? I'm personally sick of Brendan doing interviews and saying I don't know. That's a massive disconnect for me. We did do a big video on this other week. I don't know if you've seen it. If you haven't, you can check it out. Myself and Hamish sat for an hour and discussed how does the recruitment process work at Celtic and where does it all come from. And as I say, there's an identification of talent phase and a signing off of targets phase, which Brendan Rodgers is a part of. There's a scouting team led by Paul Tisdale. They identify targets, work with the coaching staff, including Brendan Rodgers, to figure out who Celtic should pursue across the transfer window. That is then put to a negotiating team, I think primarily led by Michael Nicholson and Chris Mackay on the Celtic board, and they then go and try and conclude the deals to strengthen Celtic to the degree that Brendan Rodgers and the scouting team want. So that's how it works. So he is involved in transfers. He's not involved in the negotiation or concluding deals, and that's the questions he's getting asked, and that's why he can't answer. Yes, it is a disconnect. There is a disconnect between the football department and the board or the negotiation team, as it were, in that. And yeah, someone else saying on this theme, Hans1467 saying, I blame the board, but Brendan needs to be more vocal in the boardroom and what he needs. He keeps saying he can only work with the players he has. He should be kicking down doors for new players. And maybe that's a problem this summer too. There does appear to be, from what Brendan Rodgers and how he comes across, resignation of sorts from Rodgers in his situation. Now, when Ange was at the club, and there were issues with recruitment when Ange was at the club as well, which also has to be noted. It wasn't all positivity in terms of transfers with Ange. It was a little bit better, but Ange was a force of nature at times in trying to convince people at the clubs to do certain things a certain way. It seems like Brendan Rodgers hasn't been able to convince people at the club this summer, and I think that's what the problem is. I have no doubt he's having honest conversations with, his higher ups at Celtic. What he's saying publicly isn't, I don't think, what he's saying behind the scenes is kind of my point there, Ryan.
Yeah, that's exactly the point that I was going to make. He's saying things in the media, but I can almost guarantee you they'll be different to what he's saying behind the scenes. He will be asking, and he will show that frustration to the board, because at the end of the day, this impacts on him, because it impacts on his legacy at the club with the players that he's working with. If he can't get in the players that he wants, then that'll directly impact him in results, both domestically and in Europe. So I think it's quite an unfair position for Brendan Rodgers to be in, because he's the only one that's asked about transfers, and there's nobody else that answers the questions about transfers. So whenever a press conference comes around, he's the spokesperson, and there's nobody else, so he's always going to get the brunt of that. And I mean, just reading the Q&A that's available on the Celtic Way, the majority of the questions are on transfers last night. It's all, and even journalists going back and asking about transfers, because that's the main narrative coming out of the game. So it's an unfortunate position for him to be in, but he's, like I said last night, and I've made this point a couple of times, this is what he's got to work with next week, unfortunately. They won't get any new players coming in, and he's got to work on it, and that's a separate issue, but it's the cards that he's been dealt, unfortunately, as unfair as they might be going into the Champions League, but he's got to find a way of making sure that he can bring this team into the Champions League, and hopefully he'll be able to strengthen if Celtic get through to that stage. But it's just mismanagement in the transfer window, really, if we're being honest.
And listen, I know a lot of people know this, but in case you're unaware, Celtic cannot add to the squad to face Kairat in Kazakhstan. The deadline to add players to the squad for this entire tie was 11 p.m. on Tuesday. So there's no more opportunity. Even if Celtic signed 5 players tomorrow, which obviously isn't going to happen, but even if they signed 5 players tomorrow, none of them could feature in Kazakhstan next week. So that's just important to highlight. Henrik McLarston saying he signs off on players, but then how do you explain it in the mirror? Listen, that's a fair point, and kind of there does seem to be an element of, if a player is under a certain value to some degree, then they just get the go-ahead to go and do it. And these kind of more development type players, perhaps Brendan Rodgers doesn't have as much of a say in, or doesn't really, he's not going to stop the club signing them. I think Brendan Rodgers is far more involved in the players of higher value and higher value targets, players of first team quality. I would categorise that. To be frank, I don't really have the answer for you here because it's not been explained fully. Brendan Rodgers has hinted at times across the summer there's a kind of dual strategy at play where there's this what is called club signings, and I know that term winds people up, this kind of pot of club signings and then a pot of first team signings. The first team signing spot has been filled up with Tierney and Nygren, arguably Shin Yamada, although look, the jury's out on Shin Yamada. And then there's this kind of club signing spot, which is Inamura and players of that ilk. Callum Osmond, I would probably throw into that pot as well. So there does seem to be a kind of dual strategy. Now, theoretically, those things don't need to conflict, but when there's progress on one side of it and a lack of progress on the other, then naturally that's going to lead to questions, and I think that's where that comes from. Henrik McLarston also asking, was the lack of urgency an instruction from Rodgers? Was the lack of urgency an instruction from Rodgers? In as much as he might have said, "Don't panic, pace yourselves," or worse to that effect, whatever it was, the play was pedestrian and boring. Unfortunately, I don't think that was the case, because he said after the game that he wasn't happy with the intensity of the performance. So I'm not sure if that's just. I'm not sure what's happened last night, because what Brendan Rodgers was talking about and what he wanted from his team just wasn't visible on the pitch. I've said this on multiple occasions before, but when Celtic are at their best, you can see the words of Rodgers playing out on the pitch, or the words of whoever the manager is playing out on the pitch. And when you get a little bit worried, it's when the manager's saying one thing and you're seeing something different from the team, and that goes beyond transfers. That, at least to me, there's a kind of issue with how Celtic are functioning as a team at the moment, and it might be personnel, it might be all sorts of things, but it just felt like the attitude wasn't quite right last night, Ryan.
Completely. And you compare that to the positivity that I think a lot of people were feeling after that Falkirk game. Now I know that Kairat are a better team, a far better team than Falkirk, but there was positivity in the play. There was quickness, there was that speed, there was real penetration as well. You know, I'm using all of these cliches, but I'm trying to go back to a happier place on Friday when I was actually quite happy about the way that Celtic played. The difference between that and Friday to what we witnessed last night it was very telling. I don't think that Brendan Rodgers set out his team to play like that last night. I just think it didn't work on the night. Whether that was Kairat being nice and organised, I also felt. I know there was a comment earlier that was talking about how they did a number on the wingers. I also think they did a number on the midfield as well, because I think that's the quietest that Callum McGregor's been in a game in quite a while. You know, he wasn't as and he was being man marked by one of their players during the game, so they clearly did a good job and they did their homework on how instrumental Callum McGregor is to the side. You know, he does play that captain's role, but he's also a very good player on the pitch, and that is shown. And I think it's very obvious when he's not running things that Celtic just don't look like the same team, unfortunately. Yeah, it was just a very, very poor night at the office. Nothing went right for them, and they've got to improve ahead of next week. But I don't think Brendan Rodgers came out and said for them to play like that and play in that pedestrian style. I just think that's how it transpired, unfortunately.
Callum McGregor kind of did. He's in his pre-match press conference, Callum McGregor said he wanted control in the game. And listen, I think Celtic had control of the game last night. That's not really what the issue is. There was just no cutting edge, really. And again, this whole thing about we need to win 4 or 5-0, I did think that kind of context around the game was ultimately unhelpful. And I think that's why there was quite a lot of grumbling early on last night. The other tie that Celtic played against Astana under Brendan Rodgers was very tight. You know, it was a very tight game. It wasn't this chaotic back and forth type of thing. It was very narrow games, and it looks like this tie is going to play it out like that too. Kairat are good at home, and I don't think you can deny that. I think they've got a really good home form in qualifying and traditionally in when they have participated in European competition. So it's looking tough for me next week. I'm not feeling good about it. You know, I said last night I was confident before last night, and then there was another comment on the talk of 3-0 and 4-0 last night was almost arrogant to an extent. And look, I accept that, you know, saying that there would be scorelines of that could be come across as arrogant, especially in hindsight. I was confident going into the game last night, but I don't know why. I think that was me just getting caught up in the excitement of the game and the hype around the game. My gut feeling for weeks has been this is going to be difficult. And again, I don't want to always talk about videos I've done with Hamish, but the very first one of the new weekly show we did, I laid out why, whether it was Slovan Bratislava or Kairat, why this game was going to be so difficult. And people were saying last year we beat Slovan Bratislava 5-1. But if you look at that game, Nicholas Kuhn was so influential in that game, and he was so direct in that game, and he was getting good quality ball into the box, and Kyogo was there, and when you take that quality out of the team, you're not going to be better than you were against Slovan Bratislava last year, for example. And let's not forget Kairat just knocked off Slovan Bratislava, you know. So I think my gut feeling for a few weeks has been that this is a tough tie. As the build-up to the game comes around and you're thinking, well, surely we'll beat a team from Kazakhstan. That is an arrogance, and that's something that you have to keep in check sometimes. If your gut feeling is that it's going to be tough, then that's probably what you need to go with in terms of your overall opinion ahead of the game. And I'm looking at next Tuesday, Ryan, and I'm thinking my gut feeling is this is tough and Celtic will do very well to come through it. Like I'm pretty worried about it, frankly, about getting through to the league phase.
Yeah, I'm certainly concerned. I'm a little bit concerned, even more so after maybe seeing Kairat as a better team than maybe I thought they were, or a more organised team. I think that was maybe down to Celtic as well in the way that they played, but maybe I wasn't giving them enough credit in the lead up to the game. But I thought they were well organised and they did their job effectively last night.
Okay, guys, I think we're going to start to wrap up here now. Thanks for staying with us throughout the show. I know it's like when negative shows are never nice, and we don't want to be slagging off Celtic. That's not what we're not in the business of doing that. Some people might think we are sometimes, or they might think we are too positive about Celtic sometimes. But I hate these aftermath type shows. I really do not like them, because it means that Celtic are not achieving, and not doing what they could do. And we'll be back. We'll be back tomorrow. We've got I think Ryan 118 is joining us on the briefing tomorrow morning. Ryan, a good friend of yours, I know. So we'll have a different type of chat with him about what's going on. Tomorrow's a new day. All kind of resets. We'll hear from Brendan Rodgers again tomorrow. There's a game at the weekend. It all rumbles on. It's not been comfortable speaking about Celtic in these terms and all of this. So. But as Brendan Rodgers says, and this is pretty telling, he's at the "it is what it is" stage, Ryan. That's never good when you're reduced to that.
When it's Brendan Rodgers saying it is what it is, it's not a good stage at all.
Listen, thank you for all your comments. And like I said last night, I wanted you to leave comments below the line, and you all did. And they were all, as you can see, they were all well thought out, even if we don't agree with them or not everyone agrees with them. They were at least well thought out and well put forward. So I really thank you for leaving your comments. The live chat has been incredible today. There's been so many comments and good talking points, good debating talking points. I know you're all talking between yourselves sometimes, not necessarily with us, but we like that. We like the community. So continue that. And thank you if you want to leave a comment on this video and let us know what your thoughts are on Celtic right now, what you think of what we should be talking about at Celtic. And listen, I'll be frank, like sometimes, it's good to take guidance on what you want us to talk about at Celtic. We can't all be from us. We do try our best in that regard, but please tell us if there's something that we're missing that you want us to talk about more consistently, let us know, and we will try our best, Ryan, thank you for joining us. Thank you for giving your thoughts. I know you got home late from Celtic Park last night. You're up doing this, and we appreciate that. We appreciate everyone, and that's something that I want to highlight again as well. Despite things not going particularly well at the moment, we do appreciate all the comments, all the debate, all the opinions, and that's what we try. Any final thoughts before we head off, Ryan?
I think this has been a worthwhile therapy session, is my sort of final comment. I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed saying my piece. I feel like the live, I've got to just echo your point really on the live comments and the people that are watching. We've got the exact figure on StreamYard, the system that we use. Truly incredible numbers this morning, and it shows there's still a hunger for these shows through the good and the bad. So thank you to each and every one of you, and if you like what we do, please subscribe. Yes, subscribe to the channel, have a look at the website. We didn't promote it today, but we do, because I didn't think it was right to promote this new offer we have, but we do have a new Made by Frankie Tierney print that we'll be able to discuss more tomorrow. I didn't want to fire that on all you just through all this. I don't want it to seem like we're being opportunist in that regard. So we will, but if you subscribe now, it's £1 for 6 months and you get a free Made by Frankie print. We'll have more promotion of that as the days progress. But take a look at the website, take a look at what we do. We're trying our best to provide pretty balanced and informative coverage of Celtic, regardless of what's going on. Not to get too high, don't get too low, but talk about everything going on. This outro has been going on for 10 minutes, so I am going to end it here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we will see you again next time on The Celtic Way. Cheers, guys.